State of Indiana, County of Carroll, State of Indiana versus Richard Allen. Memorandum of law in support of admission of evidence of alternative theories of the crime and third-party perpetrators. Now comes Richard Allen by counsel and provides this memorandum of law in support of admission of evidence of alternative theories of the crime and third-party perpetrators. Introduction. Mr. Allen has a constitutional right under the 6th and 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution and Article 1, Section 13 of the Indiana Constitution to present evidence attacking the credibility of the prosecution's case, undermining the believability of the prosecution's witnesses, identifying third-party suspects, and establishing Mr. Allen's theory of the case. This right is the cornerstone of the adversarial process and essential to a fundamentally fair trial, and denial of this right constitutes structural error. Whether rooted directly in the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment or in the compulsory process of confrontation clauses of the 6th Amendment, the Constitution guarantees criminal defendants a meaningful opportunity to present a complete defense. Crane v. Kentucky 476, U.S. 683-690-106 S. Court, 2142, 1986. This right is accomplished through the right to offer the testimony of witness and to compel their attendance at trial. Cubs v. State 784, NE 2D 905-923-24, Indiana 203, and Washington v. Texas 3880 or U.S. 14, 1987, S. Court, 1920, 1967. It is necessary for both the accused and the prosecution to present their version of the facts to the jury so it may decide where the truth lies. Bizard v. State 269E, NE 3D 1060-1066, Indiana Court of Appellate, 2015, citing Barber v. State 911 NE 2D 641-646, Indiana Court of Appellate, 2009. Roach v. State 934 NE 2D 934939, Indiana 1998. Just as an accused has the right to confront the prosecution's witness for the purpose of challenging their testimony, he has the right to present his own witness to establish a defense. This right is a fundamental element of due process of law. Washington v. Texas 388, U.S. at 19. When the prosecution seeks to prevent an accused the opportunity to present other versions or possibilities regarding the alleged crime, either through cross-examination or his own witnesses and exhibits, they are urging the trial court to commit not only an evidentiary error, but a constitutional error from which prejudice is presumed. Hernandez v. State 761 NE 2D 845-853, Indiana 2002. Holding that the burden switches to the state to rebut the presumption by showing that the error was harmless beyond a reasonable doubt. Similarly, exclusion of evidence tending to show that someone other than the accused committed the charged crime is inconsistent and substantial justice and therefore cannot be deemed harmless error. Allen v. State 813 NE 2D 349361, Indiana Court of Appellate, 2004. Thus, the question becomes what type of evidence is so critical and unique to Mr. Allen's defense that the U.S. and Indiana constitutions, above and beyond the Indiana rules of evidence, require its admission. The Indiana courts have answered the question by reversing cases when the excluded evidence challenged the credibility of the state's investigation and witnesses, presented an alternative exculpatory explanation of the state's evidence. Moore v. State 440 NE 2D 1092, Indiana 1982, or showed that someone else could have committed the crime. Allen v. State 813 NE 2D 349, Indiana Court of Appellate, 2004. At the hearing of the prosecution's motion in limina, Mr. Allen presents evidence that the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German have ties to Odinism and were ritualistic. Mr. Allen also presented evidence that third parties are linked to the murders. The prosecution seeks to exclude evidence of third-party motive that is not relevant and or the probative value is outweighed by unfair prejudice, confusion of the issues, or has the potential to mislead the jury in violation of Rule 401, Motion in Limina, April 29, 2024. The prosecution further requests an order to exclude testimony of evidence concerning A. Odinism, B. Cult and ritualistic killing, C. Brad Holder, D. Patrick Westfall, E. Johnny Messer, F. Elvis Fields, G. Ned Smith, H. Rod Abrams, I. Kagan Klein, J. Jerry Anthony Klein, K. Ron Logan. The prosecution's requests seek to limit Mr. Allen's ability to present a defense and, if granted, violate Mr. Allen's right pursuant to the 6th and 14th Amendments to the United States of the Constitution and Article 1, Section 12 and 13 of the Indiana Constitution to confront and cross-examine witnesses and to present his own defense. 1. Mr. Allen is entitled to present evidence pursuant to the 6th and 14th Amendments of the United States Constitution and Article 1, Section 12 and 13 of Indiana Constitution that the crime has elements of Odinism and ritualistic killings. The 6th and 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 12 of Indiana Constitution, demand that the jury hear all versions and possibilities regarding the alleged crime. Moore v. State 440 NE2D at 1092. Holding it was a constitutional violation to prohibit defendant from introducing suicide note near body and allowing state to introduce death certificate stating homicide. The state cannot take advantage of the inculpatory conclusion, but prohibit the defendant from placing the exculpatory conclusion before the jury. Turney v. State 759 NE 2D 671 677 Indiana Court of Appellate 2001. Holding otherwise inadmissible evidence that third-party previously molested victim was admissible as alternative explanation for victim's injuries. In this case, the prosecution argues that Richard Allen, acting alone, killed Abigail Williams and Liberty German. However, the evidence from the location where the bodies were found strongly suggests that more than one person was responsible for these murders. Former Indiana State Police Detective Kevin Murphy testified that it was always the belief of the law enforcement that there were between 2 to 6 people involved in the murders. If the prosecution's argument is that Richard Allen acted alone and there are alternative theories that the murders were committed by more than one person, then who are the additional people involved in killing Abigail Williams and Liberty German? The answer is that there are third-party suspects who have not been charged and who have no ties to Richard Allen. This leads to the conclusion that Richard Allen is innocent and that other individuals acting together killed Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Dr. Don Perlmutter, the director of Symbol Intelligence Group and adjunct professor of forensic medicine in the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, and who trains federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, testified that the murders were committed by individuals with ties to racist Odinism, sometimes known as Oshotru. Odinism and Oshotru are polytheistic ideologies involving the worship of Nordic pagan gods, including Odin and Thor. These ideologies are nature-based ideologies, and their rituals generally take place outdoors, incorporate natural elements, and are typically performed near natural bodies of water. Both ideologies incorporate the use of runes, which are marks of mysterious or magical powers. Runes take on additional magical powers when changed by blood or when 2 or more single runes are coupled together to create a bind rune. Both ideologies also incorporate magical thinking. Dr. Perlmutter further testified that while Odinists have general shared symbols such as Odin's hammer, as they splinter off and form different kindreds, they often develop their own symbols and rituals. Social media has been a large part of this development as it allows individual access to a wide range of interpretations, symbols, and ideas relating to Asatru and Odinism. Dr. Perlmutter testified that the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German meet all the elements of ritualistic killing and was a textbook ritualistic killing. The elements of a ritualistic killing include 1. The location of the crime. Dr. Perlmutter testified that Odinism and Ashru are nature-based ideologies. These murders took place outdoors in a clearing in a wooded area near a body of water. Dr. Perlmutter testified that in Odinism and Ashru, clearings can be the location of a sacred circle where rituals and sacrifices take place. She further testified that it is important that the murders took place near a body of water, as water is often used for the purification prior to rituals or sacrifices. 2. Date of death. Dr. Perlmutter testified that often rituals and sacrifices take place on important days. She testified that Balas Blot is a sacrificial feast day honoring Odin's son Balas. This begins at sundown on February 13th and ends at sunup on February 14th. Liberty German and Abigail Williams disappeared on February 13th, 2017, and were found on February 14th, 2017. 3. Cause of death. Dr. Perlmutter testified that ritualistic crimes are most often committed by sharp force injury to the neck, and that slitting the throat is indicative of sacrifice and an initial ritual. Both girls were killed in this manner. See Defendants Exhibit GG and HH, Autopsy Reports of Roland Core. 4. Murder weapon. Dr. Perlmutter testified that ritualistic crimes are often committed with ceremonial knives. The weapon used to kill the girls was a knife. Defendants Exhibit GG and HH, Autopsy Reports of Roland Core. 5. Symbols at crime scene. Dr. Perlmutter testified that in ritualistic killings, symbols including runes are often left at the scene. In this instance, there is what can be interpreted as Legis rune, painted or transferred to a tree with Liberty German's blood. This tree is located near the area where the girls' bodies were ultimately found on the edge of the clearing. Additionally, Dr. Perlmutter testified that the sticks and branches laid on the bodies appeared deliberately and intentionally placed in particular arrangements which would have meaning to the individuals committing the crime. FBI Special Agent Nicole Roberts testified that when she was searching the home of Ron Logan, she was looking for evidence of runes and anything Nordic due to placement of sticks on the girls' bodies. Nicole Robertson, page 75. The emails between FBI and State Police Superintendent Doug Carter are provided evidence of the belief by law enforcement that the evidence left behind at the crime scene, including sticks found on the girls, supported the possibility that the killers were Norse paganists. Defenses Exhibit E. Number 6. Body disposition. Dr. Perlmutter testified that in ritualistic killings, bodies are often moved and positioned in a fashion that is not a counter-forensic measure. In other words, that the bodies are moved and positioned in a manner not consistent with someone who is trying to conceal the bodies. She further testified that the bodies are often positioned to include the arrangement of natural objects. In paragraph 6 of her affidavit for probable cause, the search warrant for the home of Ron Logan, Exhibit H to Nicole Robertson's deposition, FBI Special Agent Nicole Robertson testified that it was her belief that Liberty German and Abigail Williams' bodies had been moved and staged. Major Cicero of the LaPorte County Sheriff's Department also testified at the hearing that Liberty German's body was drug around the crime scene and that Abigail Williams was moved from side to side. Additionally, it is evident from the crime scene photo identified as Exhibit FF that sticks and branches were deliberately and intentionally arranged on the bodies. Major Cicero testified that the sticks and branches maybe covered 3% of the girls' bodies. He further testified that there were many leaves and sticks in the area which could have been used to conceal the bodies if that was the intent of the killer. 7. Atypical blood pattern. Finally, Ms. Perlmutter testified that there is often atypical blood patterns identified in ritualistic killings. She identified the blood pattern on Liberty German's face as an atypical blood pattern. This abnormal blood pattern on Liberty German's face was also identified by Major Cicero. Mr. Allen has a constitutional pursuant right to the 6th and 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 12 of the Indiana Constitution, to present evidence describing the area where the bodies were found, the manner in which they were found, and to provide an explanation for said descriptions. He further has the right to prevent evidence flowing therefore that the individuals who killed Abigail Williams and Liberty German were followers of Ashru and Odinism, and that the murders were part of a ritualistic sacrifice. 2. The 6th and 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution and Article 1, Section 13 of the Indiana Constitution protect Mr. Allen's right to challenge the manner, quality, and thoroughness of the investigation, to inquire about law enforcement's failures to consider third-party suspects, and to present evidence of a biased investigation. Mr. Allen has a fundamental right under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, the Constitution Clause of the 6th Amendment of the United States Constitution, and Article 1, Section 13 of Indiana Constitution to call law enforcement officers as witnesses and to cross-examine them on third-party suspects, as a failure to properly investigate or consider third-party suspects undermines the thoroughness of their investigation. Heiser v. State, 996 NE 2D 44349, Indiana Court Appellate 2020. Bowles v. State, 834 NE 2D 669676, Indiana Court Appellate 2005. Pruitt v. State, 819 NE 2D 393407, Indiana Court Appellate 2014. The fact that an investigator may have discounted a viable fact or suspect makes it more probable the investigation was flawed and that Mr. Allen is innocent, thus meeting the requirements of relevancy under Indiana Rules of Evidence 401 and 402. Mr. Allen also has fundamental right to impeach the credibility of and present the bias of witnesses, including law enforcement. A witness's bias, prejudice, or ulterior motives are always relevant and at trial, and that they may discredit her or affect the weight of her testimony. Shanholt v. State, 448 NE 2D 308 316, Indiana Court Appellate 1983. IRE 616. It has been well established that law enforcement, like all humans, can suffer from confirmation bias and tunnel vision. In other words, a detective or officer may search for the interpret evidence in any manner that confirms his or her existent beliefs. B. Coulter and Prop. Keith Finley, Conviction of the Innocent. Lessons from Psychology Research. ABA Press 2010. In this matter, Mr. Allen's evidence is that law enforcement failed to properly investigate third-party suspects and failed to consider alternative theories to their timeline. In this case, members of Unified Command failed to follow up on the leads and investigations of Assistant Police Chief Todd Click and Indiana State Police Detective Kevin Murphy, such as the failures to perform an extraction of Brad Holder's phone. The failure to investigate the alibi of Patrick Westfall or Elvis Fields, and the failure to seek warrants to search the homes of those individuals. Unified Command did not consider any fact that did not fall into their timeline that the girls were murdered between 2:14 and 3:30 p.m. on February 13, 2017. Unified Command failed to investigate why Liberty German's cell suddenly connected to the cell phone tower at 4:33 a.m. on February 14, 2017, after not connecting to the tower from 5:44 p.m. on February 13, 2017 until 4:33 a.m. on February 14, 2017. Indiana State Police Detective Jerry Holman testified that there was no evidence that Richard Allen returned to the location where the bodies were found after 3:30 p.m. on February 13, 2017. Something happened at 4:33 a.m. on February 14, 2017 that caused Liberty German's cell phone to suddenly connect to the cell phone tower, and it is logical to believe that whatever caused the phone to connect was the result of actions taken by third-party suspects. The evidence goes to the very heart of the thoroughness of the investigation into the deaths of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Mr. Allen's constitutional rights require that this evidence be admitted, U.S. Constitution, AMD 614, Indiana Constitution, ART 1 and 1213. 2. The Sixth Amendment to the United States Constitution and Article 1, Section 12 and 13 of the Indiana Constitution protect Richard Allen's right to present evidence that someone else committed the crime. Evidence is relevant when it has a tendency to make the existence of any fact that is of consequence to the determination of the action more probable or less probable than it would be without the evidence, IRE 401. Evidence which tends to show that someone else committed the crime logically makes it less probable that the defendant committed the crime, and thus meets the definition of relevance in Rule 401, Joyner v. State 678 NE 2D 386389, Indiana 1997. In order for a defendant to admit evidence that a third party is responsible for the crime, the defendant must show some connection between the third party and the crime. Pelley v. State 901 NE 2D 494505, Indiana 2009. When the state excludes competent, reliable evidence that is central to the defendant's case, his constitutional right to present evidence is abridged. Joyner v. State 678 NE 2D 386390, Indiana 1997. Indiana courts have found the following evidence to be competent and reliable evidence central to the accused defense that someone else did it. For instance, in Allen v. State 813 NE 2D 349, Indiana Court Appellate 2004, the defense provided a reconstitution of the crime and testimony that another person made statements linking himself rather than the defendant to the murders, which should have been admitted. If Joyner v. State 678 NE 2D 386, Indiana 1997, evidence that a married man was having an affair with the victim, worked at the same place as the victim, the defendant had sexual relations with the victim that night before the murder, lied to his wife about the whereabouts, had an argument with the victim on the last day she was seen alive, and had lied on his time card at work the day after the murder was admissible, in Rohr v. State 866 NE 2D 242-247, Indiana 2007. Evidence that a prior beating of a child victim by mother, not defendant, caused victims extensive injuries was admissible in Cuckey v. State 483 NE 2D 788-792, Indiana Court Appellate 1985. Evidence of a newspaper article with a picture of a person wanted in connection with burglaries in the area and who resembled the defendant was admissible. Understanding that evidence of the third-party suspects is relevant, the question then turns to the standard the court must utilize to determining whether the third-party evidence is admissible. As the Indiana Court of Appeals has stated, to be admissible in a criminal prosecution, evidence that a third party has committed a crime with which the defendant is charged need to not show substantial proof of a probability that the third person has committed the act. It need only be capable of raising questions or reasonable doubt of the defendant's guilt. While a criminal defendant may present alternative perpetrator evidence at a trial in order to cast doubt on the defendant's guilt, the defendant must first lay an evidentiary foundation to establish that the alternative perpetrator evidence has an inherent tendency to connect the alternative perpetrator to the actual commission of the charged crime. Tibbs v. State 59 NE 3D 1005-1011, Indiana Court Appellate 2016, citing 29 AMJUR 2D Evidence 598 2008. Here, Mr. Allen's evidence of third-party suspects falls well within this category of complete, reliable evidence central to his defense that he is innocent and that other people committed the murders. Mr. Allen's evidence has an inherent tendency to connect the third-party suspects to the commission of the crime. Brad Holder. Brad Holder is the father of Logan Holder, who was Abigail Williams' boyfriend at the time of the murders. Law enforcement identified Brad Holder as a suspect of February 17, 2017, 3 days after the bodies were discovered. Defendants Exhibit E, MOT to dismiss HRG, July 30, 2024. Law enforcement received several tips that Brad Holder was the man in the video found on Liberty German's cell phone, purportedly taken to the south end of the Monon High Bridge at 2:13 p.m. on February 13, 2017, and that he was involved in the murders. Memorandum in supplement of the accused MOT for Frank's HRG, page 81 through 89. In this first interview with law enforcement on February 17, 2017, Brad Holder told officers that he had never met Abigail Williams. In his second interview with law enforcement on August 30, 2023, Brad Holder claimed that he had difficulty remembering which girl that Logan had dated, despite the fact that the girl Logan dated had been involved in a high-profile murder case. In this second interview, Holder now remembered that he had supervised one date between Logan Holder and Abigail Williams. Brad Holder then told a third different story as to how many times he had met Abigail Williams when he was deposed on May 2, 2024. Deposition Brad Holder, page 19. In his deposition, Brad Holder claimed he had met Abigail Williams twice, including a third-party suspect, Pat Westfall's house. ID. It is also important to note that Pat Westfall never admitted to the police that Abby Williams had been in his house. Memorandum and supplement of the accused MOT from Frank's HRG 99 through 101 and Exhibit 39. Richard Allen has a right to have the jury consider the following about Brad Holder's second statement on August 30th, 2023, and whether his second statement and his deposition 9 months later, both providing different accounts of his Holder's interaction with Abigail Williams, tend to show that he is a third-party suspect. 1. Whether Holder lied in his first interview on February 17, 2017, to inoculate himself against being a suspect by denying having met Abigail Williams. This is inconsistent with his statement on August 2023, when he stated he had met Abigail Williams, and with his deposition testimony that he met her twice. 2. The validity of lack of validity of Brad Holder's initial claim that he had never met Abigail Williams in his February 17, 2017 interview, 3 days after she was found murdered, but then somehow was able to remember 6 years later, when interviewed on August 30th, 2023, that he had in fact met Abigail Williams one time. 3. The likelihood that in 2023 Brad Holder would not know which of the murdered girls his son dated following the media coverage from this high-profile case, or whether his claim to not remember which girl his son dated was simply another attempt at Brad Holder to feign ignorance of his knowledge of Abigail Williams to throw law enforcement off his scent as a suspect. 4. The likelihood that Holder's ever-changing stories of meeting Abigail Williams, including his last story that he met her twice, once at Westfall's house, is indicative of a man who can't keep his story straight and only changes his stories because he is unaware of law enforcement's evidence of those meetings, causing Holder to step closer to the truth with every account he tells. 5. Why would Pat Westfall choose to not tell law enforcement that Abby Williams had been to his house, as Brad Holder claimed in his deposition? And does such a mission show that Westfall was concerned about being connected to Abby Williams? In the course of the investigation, law enforcement found that Brad Holder posted many pictures of runes on Facebook and disclosed their symbolism and magical powers. His Facebook post indicates he believes in the magical powers of runes. Defendants Exhibit II, KK, and LL. Even more revealing are Brad Holder's own words in which he admits the runes hold magical properties. Deposition Brad Holder 118 through 119. Brad Holder liked a post describing an outdoor sacrifice with a rune painted in human blood on a tree. Defendant's Exhibit RR. Brad Holder also posted a picture on Facebook depicting a scene eerily similar to that of the bodies when they were found. Defendant's Exhibit SS. He intentionally inscribed a temporary tattoo on his hand in the pattern similar to the sticks and branches placed on Abigail Williams. Defendant's Exhibit JJ. Even retired Indiana State Police Detective Kevin Murphy admitted that the sticks placed on Abigail Williams' body matched the temporary tattoo that Brad Holder inked on his hand just a few weeks after the girls were murdered. Furthermore, Holder painted and then posted a picture of Odin's sacrifice in which the Norse pagan god Odin is hanging upside down and one leg is bent in such a manner that his foot is resting against his calf. The position of Odin's leg in Brad Holder's painting is almost exactly the position in which the killer placed Abigail Williams' leg. Defense's Exhibit NN. Brad Holder believes in the power of magic and blood as it relates to magic. This is evidenced by the Facebook post as well as Amber Holder's testimony that Brad Holder intentionally cut his hand and allowed the blood to drip on his Odin altar. Amber Holder testified that Brad Holder took her hand and cut her hand to drip the blood onto the altar. Major Pat Cicero testified that the markings found on the tree, Defendant's Exhibit 00, near the bodies was transformed to the tree with Liberty German's blood. Dr. Perlmutter and Major Cicero testified that the markings on the tree appeared to be an upside-down L. Dr. Perlmutter testified that this resembles the rune Legas. Dr. Perlmutter testified that runes charged by blood carry additional importance and magical powers and that blood is the highest offerings to the gods. The Norse pagan ritual videotaped by Brad Holder in Fort Wayne clearly showed Pat Westfall using his hand to mark the tree in some fashion, similar to the Facebook post referenced earlier, which was marked with human blood and which Brad Holder liked. Brad Holder testified that one of the times he met Abigail Williams took place at the home of third-party suspect Patrick Westfall. Deposition Brad Holder, page 20. Amber Holder, Brad Holder's ex-wife, testified that Brad Holder told her that Patrick Westfall and his crew murdered Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Richard Allen has a 6th and 14th Amendment right to present to the jury these facts and to argue that Brad Holder was pointing the finger at Patrick Westfall to either A, insulate himself, Holder, as a suspect by implicating Patrick Westfall, or B, the Patrick Westfall, who had no real alibi, actually killed those girls, and Brad Holder knew it and wanted someone to know in the event that he, Holder, was ever accused of the murders. Or C, that Patrick Westfall, acting in concert with Brad Holder, had the girls abducted while Brad Holder was at work, awaiting Holder's arrival in Delphi later, at which time they killed the girls. These facts and arguments, along with the knowledge that both Holder and Westfall were Norse paganist and the belief of law enforcement and expert witnesses that the crime scene was filled with Norse pagan elements, all tend to show Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall killed Abigail Williams and Liberty German, and therefore this evidence should be presented to the jury. Consistent with the low bar required to honor a defendant's constitutional right to present third-party suspect evidence, Amber Holder's August 1, 2024 testimony exhibits an inference that Patrick Holder and Patrick Westfall killed the girls because of Westfall's belief that Abigail Williams' mom was a race traitor. Dr. Perlmutter also testified that individuals adhering to the white nationalist version of Odinism would kill others because of the belief that someone was a race traitor. Furthermore, Amber testified that Brad Holder told her that Westfall wanted to move on from animal sacrifices to human sacrifices and that this was the real source of the falling out between Holder and Westfall. In his deposition, Holder denied ever making any of these statements to Amber Holder. Deposition Brad Holder, page 73 through 78. Brad Holder's denial of uttering those statements to Amber Holder makes Holder's statements subject to impeachment at trial. Brad Holder's alibi is in question because of the 4:33 a.m. phone activity. Detective Jerry Holman testified that Brad Holder had an alibi as he left work at 2:45 p.m. on February 13, 2017, and was 40 minutes away from the Monon High Bridge. First Sergeant Chris Cecil of the Indiana State Police testified that the phone ultimately found under Abigail's body did not receive any SMS messages from 4:06 p.m. on February 13, 2017, until 4:33 a.m. on February 14, 2017. This suggests that Liberty German's cell phone was not connected to a cell tower at that time. Law enforcement's claim is that the phone had remained under Liberty German's body from around 3:30 on February 13, 2017, until it was found around noon on February 14, 2017. However, cutting against that theory is the fact that the police report references Sergeant Mitchell Blocher's belief that the phone, as of around 10 p.m. on February 13, 2017, was either no longer in working condition or that it was out of the area. We know from Chris Cecil that the phone was in working order because it connected to the cell tower at 4:33 a.m. on February 14, 2017. Therefore, the police report supports the fact that the phone was out of the area for a period of time. Side note, a race traitor is a person who supports attitudes or positions that are against the interest or well-being of their own race. www.yourdictionary.com. In further support that the phone was out of the area is the fact that from 5:44 p.m. on February 13, 2017 until 4:33 a.m. on February 14, 2017, the phone in question did not connect to the tower in spite of law enforcement's claim that the phone had never moved from under Liberty German's body from roughly 3:30 p.m. on February 13, 2017 until the girls were found around noon on February 14, 2017. Liberty German's phone received no SMS messages from 4:06 p.m. on February 13, 2017 until suddenly receiving 15 SMS messages at 4:33 a.m. on February 14, 2017. It defies all logic that 15 individuals suddenly sent SMS messages to Liberty German's phone at 4:33 a.m. on February 14, 2017, when she had been missing for over 14 hours. When Liberty German's phone once again connected with the tower, as Chris Cecil finally admitted during his testimony, all of these messages awaiting Liberty German's cell phone finally matriculated onto Libby's phone at 4:33 a.m. The simple explanation is that someone who was at the scene turned on the phone at 4:33 a.m., causing the phone to connect to the tower once again at 4:33 a.m. Jerry Holman testified that in the law enforcement's theory of events, Richard Allen never returned to the crime scene after he left at around 3:30 p.m. on February 13, 2017. Therefore, who could have been at the scene at 4:33 a.m. to turn the phone on? If Abigail Williams and Liberty German were killed around 4:33 a.m. on February 14, 2017, Brad Holder's alibi for 3:30 p.m. on February 13, 2017 is meaningless, as is his alleged alibi that he was working out at 2 a.m. on February 14, 2017. The only time he went to the gym at 2 a.m. Deposition Brad Holder, page 28 through 29. These phone issues are a major problem for the prosecution's contention that Richard Allen acted alone and that he left the area where the bodies were found at 3:30 p.m. on February 13, 2017, and certainly provide the minimum nexus, along with other evidence detailed herein, required to clear the hurdle that allows third-party suspect evidence at trial. Brad Holder is connected with other suspects in this case. One of those suspects is Patrick Westfall. Patrick Westfall was at home near the Monon High Bridge on February 13, 2017 with his son Nick. Patrick Westfall interviewed August 27, 2023 at 11:56. Memorandum in support of the accused MOT for Frank's hearing, Exhibit 39. There is no proof of Westfall's whereabouts on February 13, 2017, other than his statement. To date, law enforcement has provided no concrete evidence of Westfall's whereabouts on February 13, 2023. Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall knew each other from an Army deployment in Afghanistan. Patrick Westfall and Brad Holder practiced Ashtrue. Patrick Westfall interviewed August 27, 2023 at 11:56 to 12:19. They were members of a small kindred, which is a group of people who believe in Ashtrue and who gather to hold meetings and worship the gods. ID at 12:24. Patrick Westfall is a priest or holy man in the Ashtrue religion and hosted kindreds at his home in Delphi on Sundays. ID at 17:37. Brad Holder attended these meetings. ID at 12:19. Holder and Westfall attended a pagan ritual videotaped by Brad Holder in 2016 in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which he entered into evidence. Near the end of the video, Patrick Westfall appears to be making or marking the tree with his hand. Defendants Exhibit PP and QQ. Major Cicero testified that a tree at the crime scene was marked with blood of Liberty German. Dr. Perlmutter testified that the mark was in the form of a rune. Major Cicero admitted that whoever sliced Liberty German's throat could have Liberty German's blood on their hands. The forensic pathologist who conducted the autopsy admitted that upon slicing Liberty German's neck, the amount of blood and the force of the blood exiting Liberty's neck upon slicing it would have been very powerful, squirting as far as 4 to 6 feet, no problem. Deposition of Dr. Roland Core, 97 to 98. Therefore, concluding that upon slicing the neck, the blood forcefully covered the killer's hand, who then used the blood to mark the tree. I'm going to pause here to insert the side note that was at the bottom of the previous page. This deposition was not included during the evidentiary presentation and therefore is being provided via first-class mail as an exhibit for this court to consider. Patrick Westfall told police that he had sacrificed a chicken by cutting off its head. Patrick Westfall interview August 17, 2023 at 57:49 through 58:27. Dr. Perlmutter testified that sacrifices are almost always carried out by slitting the throat of the animal or person by sacrificed, and furthermore, that practitioners of these religions often begin with animal sacrifices. As mentioned earlier, Amber Holder testified that Brad Holder stated that Patrick Westfall wanted to elevate from animal sacrifice to human sacrifice. Furthermore, Patrick Westfall acknowledges that Ashtrue worship takes place in a clearing in the forest. Westfall, August 17, 2023, interview 44:45 through 47. This is consistent with Dr. Perlmutter's testimony that rituals will occur in open spaces in the forest. Both victims in this case were found in a clearing in the forest. This creates an inference that Patrick Westfall was involved in the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German, and that they were sacrificed in an Ashtrue Norse pagan ritual. Elvis Fields. Elvis Fields, a Rushville, Indiana resident, is a suspect in this case who was investigated by law enforcement. There is no doubt that Elvis Fields knew of the existence of Brad Holder. He admitted as much in his deposition. Deposition Elvis Fields, page 19 through 25. Additionally, Detective Kevin Murphy testified that Brad Holder can be linked to Elvis Fields through Facebook posts and that Elvis Fields' Facebook posts mimicked those of Brad Holder's. Defense's Exhibit KKLLMM. Elvis Fields testified in his deposition that Brad Holder frequently mimicked his Facebook post when he posted pictures of knives, brass knuckles, sticks in the woods, or other items. Deposition Elvis Fields at 16. It is a logical conclusion that Brad Holder knew Elvis Fields in some manner if he was mimicking Elvis Fields' Facebook post. It would be extremely rare for a stranger to follow someone's posts and even rarer to mimic them, especially when both were suspects in the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Former Rushville Assistant Police Chief Todd Click testified that Elvis Fields was a suspect or accomplice in the murders and that he was interviewed several times by law enforcement. After one such interview in which law enforcement collected a buccal swab from Elvis Fields, Detective Kevin Murphy drove Elvis Fields home. Detective Murphy testified that after Elvis Fields got out of his car, he returned and asked Detective Murphy if his spit was found on one of the girls, but he can explain it away. Would he still be in trouble? Elvis Fields lived in Rushville. He testified that he was at home in Rushville on February 13, 2017. Deposition Elvis Fields, page 30. He denied ever being in Delphi. Deposition Elvis Fields, page 49. If he spits on one of the girls, this places him in Delphi at or around the time of the murders. Elvis Fields' statement is admissible pursuant to IRE 803-3. Then existing mental, emotional, or physical condition under this rule. A statement of the declarant's then existing state of mind, such as a motive, design, intent, or plan, or emotional, sensory, or physical condition, such as a mental, feeling, pain, or bodily health, is admissible as an exception to the hearsay rule. Elvis Fields' statement is clearly indicative of a guilty state of mind and indicates he has a mental feeling of anxiousness over his conduct and possible ramifications. Additionally, Elvis Fields denied making said statement to Detective Murphy. Deposition Elvis Fields, page 14 through 15. It is expected that Elvis will continue to deny asking the question at trial, thus making it proper impeachment evidence. This statement is also impeachment evidence contradicting Elvis Fields' statement that he was never in Delphi. Finally, Elvis Fields' question to Detective Murphy was precisely that, a question. Hearsay is a statement that, 1, is not made of the declarant while testifying at the trial or hearing, and 2, is offered in evidence to prove the truth of the matter asserted. IRE 801C. A statement is a person's oral assertion, written assertion, or nonverbal conduct if the person intended it as an assertion. IRE 801A. The hearsay rule does not bar commands, requests, or questions. Pierce v. State 205 NE 2D 173176, Indiana 1998. Citing Bustamante v. State 557 NE 2D 1313 and 1316, Indiana 1990. Rod Abrams is a friend of Elvis Fields. In his statement to police, Rod Abrams testified that at the time of the murders, Ned Smith drove a white pickup truck, deposition Rod Abrams, page 19, and that also sometimes Elvis Fields drove a white pickup truck. Tina Garrison saw a white truck parked at the old CPS building near the Monon High Bridge Trail at approximately 4:20 p.m. on the day of the murders. This Tina Garrison report was tendered near the end of the day as an exhibit on August 1, 2024. Given that both Elvis Fields and his friend Ned Smith drove white pickup trucks, this potentially places them in the Delphi near the scene of the murders on February 13, 2017. Detective Kevin Murphy also testified that an analysis of Elvis Fields' cell phone records established that Elvis Fields used his phone often throughout a typical day. Strikingly, Detective Murphy testified that on February 13, 2017, Elvis did not use his phone between roughly 10:30 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. All of the above documented in Todd Click and Detective Kevin Murphy's reports. Statements made in a police report are not hearsay when offered to show the simple fact that the statements were made rather than for the truth of the matter asserted. Heiser v. State 996 NE 2D at 448-249. Indiana Court Appellate 2020. Holding that a report made to DCS by the accused was offered to show that it was made just days before the child who lived with the subject of the report accused the defendant's molestation and not the truth of the matter. The report was not hearsay and its exclusions violated the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution. IRE 803-8I states that investigative reports are admissible when offered by the accused in a criminal case. Finally, The fact that Elvis Fields, Rod Abram, and Ned Smith could not keep their story straight concerning their whereabouts with Elvis Fields on February 13, 2017 is also important. According to Todd Click, Detective Murphy Abrams told different stories as to his whereabouts with Elvis on February 13, 2017. In one story, Abrams claims he, Elvis Fields, and Ned Smith were all in Muncie Hospital visiting a friend on February 13, 2017. In his interview on 2018, Abrams admitted having his phone with him while in Muncie on February 13, 2017. However, when pressed whether his phone pings would verify that he was in Muncie at that time, Abrams stated that the hospital equipment would likely block his phone's location. During his deposition, Rod Abrams testified that he did not believe he even owned a phone in 2017, which is a different story than he told a few years earlier. Deposition Rod Abrams, page 18. While Abrams and Smith claimed that Elvis was with them in Muncie on February 13, 2017, deposition Rod Abrams, page 20, deposition Ned Smith, page 14, Elvis Fields denies he even left Rushville on that day. Deposition Elvis Fields, page 30. Yet again, Detective Murphy testifies that Elvis Fields' phone records show that the man who constantly used his phone on any given day for some reason did not use his phone between roughly 10:30 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. on February 13, 2017. A period of time of 9 hours. By Google Maps, it is roughly a 2-hour drive from Delphi to Rushville, giving Elvis plenty of time to leave his phone in Rushville Drive or be driven in a white pickup truck to Delphi to participate in the murders and then return to Rushville. I'm going to pause right here to correct something. I believe that the defense made a mistake. It says that he did not use his phone between roughly 10:30 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. on February 13th. I think they meant 7:30 p.m. on February 13th. I'm going to make that correction for them. These changed and inconsistent stories related to Elvis Fields' alibi as well as to Elvis' phone actively for February 13, 2017 provide further inferences of connections between Elvis and the murders and the third-party suspects. Furthermore, while Johnny Messer admits to knowing Elvis Fields, Rod Abrams, and Ned Smith, that is not the story that Elvis Fields and Rod Abrams told the police. Both Elvis and Rod deny knowing Johnny Messer. These points were made in documents provided to the court along with the notes that pointed to the specific pages or timestamps on the items. These inconsistencies and denials provide evidence that the parties can't keep their stories straight on something as basic as whether they know each other. These discrepancies could certainly be viewed by a jury as attempts by guilty parties to hide their connections in order to deceive law enforcement. The inconsistencies and discrepancies concerning their alibis and whether they even know each other are examples of things the jury should hear concerning third-party suspects. These discrepancies, combined with Elvis Fields' clear connection with Brad Holder through Facebook and Elvis's incriminating question to Murphy, support Richard Allen's 6th and 14th Amendment rights to pursue these third-party suspects. Johnny Messer. Johnny Messer, a former Rushville resident, is also a suspect in the case who connects the Logansport Delphi crew of Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall to the Rushville crew of Elvis Fields, Rod Abrams, and Ned Smith in Rushville. There are pictures of social media of Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall, and Johnny Messer together at an Odinist gathering. That photo was admitted into evidence on August 1, 2024, and both Kevin Murphy and Todd Click testified as to the connections between Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall, and Johnny Messer. Detective Murphy and Todd Click testified that Holder, Westfall, and Messer were all associated with the Vinlander Social Club, hereinafter Vinlanders, a club for Europeans. As explained by Patrick Westfall, Johnny Messer was a probate with the Vinlanders. Deposition Johnny Messer, page 19. Detective Murphy and Todd Click testified that the Vinlanders engaged in estrue-based practices. worshipped gods as Odin and Thor, and were Odinists. Johnny Messer confirmed that most members of the Vinlanders were into Odinism. ID page 26. Patrick Westfall and Johnny Messer traveled to Minnesota together for a Vinlander event. ID page 41, 65 through 66. Johnny Messer's uncle is Billy Messer. ID page 17. Elvis Fields previously lived with Johnny Messer's uncle in Rushville, Indiana area. ID page 35. However, one of the most important aspects of Johnny Messer's evidence in Messer's role as a recruiter in the Vinlanders, according to former Rushville Assistant Police Chief Todd Click, Messer denied recruiting members of the Vinlanders. However, Click also testified that he had interviewed multiple men who admitted that Messer had recruited them to join the Vinlanders. Messer's denial of being a recruiter for the Vinlanders juxtaposed against Click's investigation, revealing that Messer was in fact actually trying to recruit members to the Vinlanders, and would indicate that Messer felt he had something to hide. What could that be? The obvious answer would be Messer was the recruiter that hooked Elvis Fields up with Brad Holder. After all, Messer knew both Holder and Fields, although Fields denied knowing Messer. The fact that Messer's former girlfriend, Taylor Hornaday, told Kevin Murphy that around Valentine's Day in 2017 that Messer was up there visiting Vinlander friends, Westfall and Holder, and that red substance she believed was blood was found on the car he drove up there, provides additional connectivity between all these parties and the murders that Richard Allen has constitutional rights for the jury to hear of those connections. Kagan Klein and Jerry Anthony Klein, also known as Tony Klein. Kagan Klein is the son of Jerry Anthony Klein. He was 22 years old in February 2017, and he and Jerry Anthony Klein resided in Peru, Indiana, February 2017. Detective David Vito testified that Kagan Klein was communicating with Liberty German using a fake Snapchat account under the name of Anthony Schatz in the days leading up to and on February 13, 2017. The content of these messages is unknown. He further testified that Kagan Klein admitted to driving to Delphi, Indiana with his father, Jerry Anthony Klein, on February 13, 2017, and that Kagan Klein waited the vehicle while Jerry Anthony Klein went to the woods in the area where the Abigail Williams and Liberty German bodies were ultimately found. Detective David Vito testified that Kagan Klein stated that when Jerry Anthony Klein returned to the vehicle, he had blood on him. Roland Purdy further testified that Kagan Klein admitted that they discarded a knife in the river when they were driving home. All of this evidence creates an inference that Kagan Klein and Jerry Anthony Klein murdered Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Ron Logan. The bodies of Abigail Williams and Liberty German were located on February 14, 2017, on the property of Ron Logan, Deposition Special Agent Nicole Robertson, Exhibit H. Ron Logan lied to law enforcement about his whereabouts on February 13, 2017. ID Ron Logan's physical build is consistent with that of the individual in the video captured by Liberty German's iPhone on February 13, 2017, and his voice is consistent with that of the voice on the audio ID. Much like the facts in Allen, the evidence the third party killed the girls in this matter is exculpatory, unique, and critical to Mr. Allen's defense. The crime scene included many findings that the killers practiced a shrew and that it was a ritualistic crime scene. To be exculpatory, evidence must clear or tend to clear Mr. Allen of alleged fault of guilt. Tibbs 59 NE 3D at 1013. Simply put, if someone else committed the crimes, Richard Allen did not. Richard Allen has zero ties to Estrue, Odinism, or the Vinlander Social Club, unlike Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall, or Johnny Messer. The above evidence is exculpatory, and it's unique and critical to Mr. Allen's defense. The above evidence that the state wants to hide from the finder of fact is admissible for two reasons. One, it demonstrates the lack of investigation and failures with the investigation, and two, the fact of a distinct possibility, if not highly probable, that the people other than Richard Allen killed Abigail Williams and Liberty German. 3. Richard Allen has a right to introduce evidence of motive as it is always relevant. Evidence of motive is always relevant in a criminal prosecution. Ross v. State, 676 NE 2D 339346, Indiana, 1996. Davis v. State, 186 NE 3D 1203 1212, Indiana Court Appellate. Transfer denied. 194 NE 3D 600, Indiana, 2022. DRC versus State, N08 NE or 908 NE 2D 215 223, Indiana, 209. In the context of third-party motive evidence, an accused must show some connection between the third party and the crime before the evidence is admissible. Tibbs 59 NE 3D at 1011, citing Pelley versus State, 901 NE 2D 494 505, Indiana, 2009. In this case, the prosecution has no proof of any connection of Mr. Allen to Abigail Williams or Liberty German, nor have they identified any motive as to why Mr. Allen would kill them. There is absolutely no evidence as to Mr. Allen's motive to commit the crime. What does exist, however, is motive on the part of Patrick Westfall, Brad Holder, and others to kill Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Brad Holder knew Abigail Williams, as his son was dating her at the time of the murders, and he had supervised them on at least 2 dates. Patrick Westfall participated in animal sacrifices, as true sacrifices are carried out in order to provide the offender with power. Power through runes, the blood and binding runes, all of which are present at the location where the bodies were found. This provides motive for Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall to murder Abigail Williams and Liberty German as part of an estrue odinous sacrifice. Wherefore, the reasons identified above, Richard Allen by counsel respectfully requests the court deny the prosecution's motion in limina as it relates to Odinism, cult, or ritualistic killing. Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall, Johnny Messer, Elvis Fields, Ned Smith, Rod Abrams, Kagan Klein, Anthony Klein, or Ron Logan, and for all other just and proper relief in the premises. Respectfully submitted, Jennifer Auger, Andrew Baldwin, Brad Rosie. And that's it, folks. Are you still here with me? That was a 27-page tongue twister. And I'm sorry for some of the stumbles, but it was a lot and took a lot to read it. I thank you for staying with me, and I hope that it was understandable. We will see you next time. I'm sure there's going to be one here on Deb's True Crime Notebook. Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the bell for all notifications. Leave us a comment about what you think about all of this. And we'll see you next time when we'll probably be reading something from the prosecution responding to all of this. Thanks a lot for watching and listening.